All right. So tonight's talk has been inspired by the trip that the church did 2 months ago to the United Kingdom. It was a pilgrimage to the United Kingdom. And in a month's time, if you come along to this hall, it's on October 19. There'll be a luncheon here after church on a Sunday. And we're actually going to show us, be a whole slideshow over lunch of the sites seen on the pilgrimage. Tonight, you're going to meet the people behind that pilgrimage, the saints that we learnt about. So when we talk about Orthodox saints of the UK, you think, what do they exist? Have they got Orthodox saints? Is it an Orthodox country? So today we're going to go back to not to the future, back to the past, to the first centuries where Christianity was born in the United Kingdom. And you'll see in little handouts that you've got there, it's got a map of the United Kingdom around the 8th century. And the reason is, I didn't learn all this. I had to learn quite a bit to prepare this talk. I didn't know any of what I presented tonight. But you need to know some of the place names, like Northumbria. Where is Northumbria? And it's going to feature tonight as well. And you've got names, Ireland and Scotland, but there's other areas that, we don't associate with anymore. At the bottom of the page are the sort of eras, the different times or, where Christianity changed from, one zone to another, where it was pagan to Christian, the conversion of Scotland. So you'll see there's different times. It goes chronologically from pretty much the 1st century AD through to now. And I've listed a few well-known saints there. But if you look at the projector screen here, when you talk about the saints of the UK, you're talking about a huge crowd of people that most of us have no idea what their names are. Did you know there was a Saint Kevin? No. And in fact, we met a convert in the UK who's compiling a list of the saints, and he's already counted 500 and something, he said. So there's probably thousands and thousands. So let's move on. So this is an outline of tonight. We're going to look at the map of the UK as it was in the first few centuries. We're going to talk about the conversion of the UK, because the UK was not a Christian country. When it first started out, it was part of the Roman Empire, a lot of it. The Romans were pagans. They worshipped various gods. They worshipped the emperor. They were persecuting and killing Christians. If you remember, the first 2 centuries were all Christians being murdered by emperors and thrown to the lions. So it was not a Christian country. They were pagan. So you had this country that's considered a Christian country today, although it's probably 50% Christian now, had to be converted. So there had to be people who went out to convert from Ireland to Scotland to the rest of Britain. And the other thing you're going to learn tonight is that the Anglo-Saxons or the British are not one race of people. They came from different areas. So this really paints the picture of a very fragmented, not even a country, an area with different races of people, different beliefs. Many were not Christian. And how these people became Christian and these saints had a huge impact. And then we're going to finish with some take-home messages. What do we learn from these people? So if you look at your map, you will see you've got, of course, Ireland. We know Ireland, Scotland, and I love going around the UK and hearing we met a priest who was actually Scottish born. He was an Orthodox priest talking to us in Greek. And I actually spoke to him deliberately in English because I wanted to hear the Scottish accent. But you see there's Northumbria up here, a very important area, because as you'll see tonight, that a lot of this area there was not Christian. They were pagans. So many missionaries left from Ireland, went up to Scotland, to Iona. Who's heard of Iona before? Who's listened to Father Seraphim from Iona Monastery? So you'll hear about it next time. We got to meet Father Seraphim very briefly. We went to Iona. But Christianity in this northern part of the UK, Scotland, started in Iona. That little island, insignificant island, is a very holy place today, and it was centuries ago. And you're going to hear about Lindisfarne or Holy Island. We went there. But a saint we're going to talk about tonight went there. And we'll even go down to London, and we're going to be in Oxford. And we're going to hear about men and women. And actually, to be honest with you, I wasn't sure about which saints to talk about. And even right now, I'm still struggling. But I rang up one of the fellow people from the pilgrimage a few nights ago. It was Monday night. And I said, who can I talk about? And then the next day I looked at the calendar, the Metalloyo, and it said, today we commemorate there were 2 saints, and there's actually a saint today from Canterbury, we commemorate. So without realizing, these saints are popping up on our calendar continuously. So this very snazzy little diagram shows you that from the 800s, what the United Kingdom looked like, the different regions and the flags they had. You see, it was very broken up. You had the north, I think they're called the Picts, the kingdom of the Picts. They were different races. You had Ireland on the left. Then you got the Kingdom of England. And for most of history, it was a divided empire, wasn't it? It's only in the latter years of 1922 the British Isles are formed, and even Ireland is still divided. And the Archbishop of England told us that he had to give up, because this was part of his archdiocese. He gave up the part of the Republic of Ireland to a new archbishop, and that's why there's a new archbishop in Ireland now. So, this is the history of the UK. And as it was politically stormy, it had impacts on the church. So here are some terms: Celtic and Anglo-Saxon. So basically, as I said, the English were not one race of people. The Anglo-Saxons, as you'll see on the next slide, came from these areas: the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons. So we sort of lump them together, call them Anglo-Saxons, but it's often like areas like Germany, Denmark, Scandinavia. And this is in, around the 400s or 500s AD. So we know Christianity started to spread from Jerusalem out to, the Jewish areas and then the Gentile areas from after Jesus was resurrected. But you'll see in the early centuries, it slowly spreads into Britain, through various people. But you can see it's really a mixture. When you talk about the Celtic people, again, they originated from Central Europe. So you can see they ended up in areas like, Ireland and that. So you'll see these terms come up tonight. So let's start with the first era on your sheet. So you've got early Christianity, the Roman Britain, because a lot of Britain was part of the Roman Empire still. Remember, not Christian, they were a minority. And just like in Jerusalem, who was the first martyr of Jerusalem? Or protomartyras, we say in Greek? No, Aios Stephanos, Saint Stephen, the protomartyra. The British have a protomartyra too. And this icon is a photograph from the Archdiocese in London of a beautiful chapel. So there's Saint Alban. Who's ever heard of Alban as a name? But so you've got, missionaries from the early days. You've got people from Roman soldiers, merchants, missionaries going into Britain, and Christianity is starting to drop in. Okay, we got Saint Alban 304, he passed away, the first British Christian martyr. And you can see on the Archdiocese iconography, which is brand new iconography, it's called Saint Alban Protomartyra, the first martyr of England. He was beheaded. That's how he ended his life here. Then you got Saint Aristobulus of Britain. Anyone here from Cyprus originally? So he was born in Cyprus. And one tradition says he was the brother of Apostle Barnabas. So anyone that's from Cyprus can relate to Apostle Varnava. But he accompanied St. Paul as well on journeys. And he was one of the sisters of St. Andrew. So basically he ends up in Britain to preach there, and he ends up there as the first bishop of Britain. So, basically he lived and died there. So that's the first era. Now, there's saints listed on your page. We're not going to describe them all in detail tonight. There's too many. What I'm giving you tonight is a little tour through these times, and we might highlight just a few saints because of time. We don't have time to do it. But if you are inspired by somebody, go away and read about them. There's a lot on the internet. Now, the second area we're going to talk about is the conversion of Scotland. Remember, again, it's a pagan area. There are the Picts and other groups of people. And as we said, if we head to the island of Iona, it's actually just out there. Oh, I cut it off. It's actually, there's Oban and across. There's a little island there's Mull, which is a big island, in Iona. And we actually did the trip to Iona when we went there 2 months ago. And it was actually a long trip. We had to catch the ferry across to Mull and drive for 2 hours across the whole island by coach, to then catch another ferry across the little bay to Iona. So it's a tiny, tiny, tiny island. And it's going to feature tonight in the conversion of Scotland, that little island. And I think in modern days with Mull Monastery, it's having a big impact through the internet and YouTube of the talks and the things. And going there was just simply beautiful. But St. Ninian, who only was commemorated a few days ago, again, if I'm right, was from the 4th and 5th century. And he was an early missionary and he evangelized the southern Picts. So these are the early days where there are missionaries going in and telling these pagans about Christianity. Saint Columba is a major saint in the UK and was central to setting up Iona as the missionary site and the conversion of the northern area where Scotland is. And we're going to talk a little bit about Saint Columba. He was an Irish monk and he founded the monastery in Iona. So we'll move along. Saint Ninian. He was commemorated a few days ago, if I'm not wrong as well. His date's coming 16th of September. There he was. I think it was Tuesday. Again, he's from the 4th century. He was a British missionary, becomes a bishop. And he was also a missionary to Scotland, particularly the southern Picts. He was born in Britain, so he's a native Brit. He studied in Rome. And he's credited with laying the foundation for other missionary efforts. So you've got one lot of saints building on the work of another. No one does anything in isolation. And you're going to see saints tonight who actually knew each other, or one followed on from the other like a chain. And his early life, he was born to Christian parents around 360. And he traveled to Rome for several years to study Christian teaching and becomes a bishop. He then undertakes missionary work in Scotland. And you can imagine what it's like going out as one person into an area where no one believes the same as you. How do you approach those people? How do you speak? But the White House existed long before the Americans got it, right? He set up the White House at Whitthorne in Galloway, which is a monastic centre. And he preached the gospel to the Picts of southern Scotland. And basically, these are the early bits of Christianity in Scotland. Saint Columba, as I said, is a massive name. And if you listen to Father Seraphim on YouTube, he talks quite a bit about Saint Columba, enlightener of Scotland. And that's another icon from the Archdiocese in London. I'm going to tell you a bit about Saint Columba. I'm not going to read everything here, but he's actually quite inspirational. So he's commemorated on June the 9th. He was of noble birth, so he was from a well-to-do family. They were well off. And his parents, as the culture was at the time, they would send you off to like foster parents to be educated. And he was sent, and his foster parent was actually a priest at the time. So he received a Christian education, and he eventually becomes a monk, and he's preaching in Ireland. But a few things happened in his life, as happens to people, some disasters, some terrible situations, and he decides to leave Ireland. And he decides to become a pilgrim for Christ. So where does he go? He goes to the middle of nowhere. He goes to Iona in Scotland. So he leaves Ireland, he heads out there, and he takes 12 people with him. And they set up a monastic centre in Iona. Now that centre later flourished with monks, with nuns, and if you go there today, because in latter years the Vikings came and massacred a lot of them. And one of the bays there is called the Bay of Martyrs, where they're all just murdered. But in the early years, he's credited with establishing the monastic life there. He builds cells and chapel, and the monastery grows. And then they start to branch out to, into Scotland below them to spread the word. I'm just going to say a little bit about him because it's actually quite interesting about what sort of person he was. So his life is written by a subsequent abbot of the monastery. And I'll quickly say that when they went to Iona, because it was so pagan, and this is going to sound really weird, because in our age, many people don't believe in devils or demons. But because it was so pagan and so demon-possessed, they weren't even able to build a church. Things kept getting knocked down by demonic powers until one day, one of the demons appeared and said, "One of you have to sacrifice yourselves, and then we'll go away." And there's another saint who offered to be buried alive for the sake of the monastery. And the chapel where his grave is there on Iona. So in April of 597, it was Basca. Saint Columba had the sense, he knew he was going to depart this life. And God didn't allow for him to go on Basca because he didn't want the brothers to be upset. So the way it worked out was he basically ended up passing away after Easter. But he knew this was happening. And if you read his life, you'll see that he saw angels. He saw angels coming to take him away. And he was obviously so close to God that he could see things that we don't dream of seeing. I'll skip the rest of it because if you want to hear about his life, you should actually read. But he is a major saint for Scotland, Knight of Scotland. Now we move on to the Roman period, the post-Roman period. So we know the Roman Empire started to collapse. Okay, so as the Roman influence left, the paganism was on decline, Christianity was on the rise. And we know in the early 300s, Constantine the Great allowed Christianity to be a legal religion. And one thing you're going to discover next month is, do you know where Emperor Constantine, St. Constantine the Great, was actually crowned as emperor? Which country was he crowned in?
Was it Wales, maybe? I don't remember.
So he became the emperor of Byzantium, Constantinople. He was crowned in York, in England. And we actually went to a statue where he was actually officially crowned as the emperor. So it was actually in England. Tsar Constantino was actually recognized. So the post-Roman Empire period, you've got Celtic Christianity, especially that North Irish area. So Romans are withdrawing, Christianity's on the rise, and the key saints here, we've heard of St. Patrick. He's actually recognized in our church. The saints of the first 1,000 years before the schism are recognized by our church. So he's a British missionary to Ireland. He established churches and monasteries there. He's one of the big figures for the Irish. They celebrate St. Patrick. But there's a female saint they respect just as much as St. Patrick. Anybody know her name? We'll hear about her later on. And there's St. David from the 500s, the patron saint of Wales. He founded monasteries, in Wales. So you've got these different saints who actually are setting up churches and monasteries in different parts of the UK, and it's starting to grow. And there's St. David of Wales. Now, who's heard of St. Mungo or St. Kentigern? We actually went to a cathedral where he was the bishop of Glasgow, and the massive cathedral there is where he's actually buried. So, and there's even a huge, not a mural on the wall, and one of them built a modern picture of him with the bird on his shoulder. There's a story about him and animals. But St. Kentigern or Mungo was a missionary as well, and he's the patron saint of Glasgow. Now, St. Kevin, who'd think there's a St. Kevin out there? But the Irish have a St. Kevin from the 6th century, so the 500s. He's the first abbot of Glendalough in country Wicklow, Ireland. Feast day is June the 3rd. So if we have any Kevins out there, they should actually study his life. And there are lots of women saints as well. And what surprised me about the women saints is, remember, England is a country of royals. There are many royals, kings, queens, princes, princesses who became saints. And it's amazing to think about that, because they were often educated in monasteries. They were sent to monasteries to have their worldly education. And some of them loved what they lived and became monks and nuns. Some kings converted. So St. Hilda is the abbess of Whitby. Again, she's from the 600s. She's the first abbess of this monastery in Whitby. And basically, she set up other convents, and she's recognized for her wisdom. She actually had kings approaching her for advice. Now, St. Bede, who we're going to talk about tonight, is a major figure as well, because he was not only a monk, but he was a great historian. So he wrote this book. It's a classic. If it's a Penguin classic, it must be a classic. But this is St. Bede's book on the history of the English church. So if you want to actually read about the history of the church, he's documented the history and the lives of many of these saints. So he's a major reference. So St. Bede is another saint recognized by our church. Now you can see Northumbria on your maps, where it is in the northern area where Scotland is today. So Northumbria again, here you have an example of a king who was baptized. And some of these people were baptized in Iona, and you can see the link now to St. Columba. They become Christians and then they become a leader. So when the king becomes a Christian, you can see the influence on the kingdom. And his conversion was led by St. Paulinus, sent by Augustine of Canterbury. Now, who's heard of St. Aidan? Didn't ever think these were actually the names of saints? We hear these names sometimes out there in the community here in Australia, don't we? But St. Aidan was the mid-600s, another Irish monk from Iona. So you're starting to see monks from Iona now spreading down into Scotland. So you have St. Columba, who set up this beautiful site, very holy site, and then the monks are carrying on his legacy. So he set up Lindisfarne, and Lindisfarne is also called Holy Island. And to get to Holy Island or Lindisfarne, we actually went there. You have to leave the mainland and you have to cross the road at low tide. So we had to drive there at 5 p.m. in the afternoon or 4 p.m. because during the day the waters are up, so you're stuck there. So we had to wait till the tide dropped and we drove across the little road and we ended up on Holy Island or Lindisfarne. So you can see how beautiful, isolated it was for a monastery. So it was like if you've seen, I suppose, Monemvasia or something like that in Greece, where it's just a little rocky island surrounded by water with a bridge. Well, this one gets cut off every day by the water. And so he set up, St. Aidan sets up the monastery there, which of course in latter centuries gets demolished by Vikings. And it's a sad history of British history that, you've got the Vikings come along and destroying things centuries later. But he was involved with spreading the Christian message through Northumbria. So you've got Northumbria on your maps. And then there's St. Cuthbert. Who'd think about St. Cuthbert? Well, if you read St. Thede's book, he's written another book about the life of St. Cuthbert. Okay, and again, a name you'd never think existed. He was a monk and later a bishop of Lindisfarne, a very holy person who actually performed a lot of miracles. So there's St. Aidan, who we spoke about, the apostle to Northumbria, setting up Holy Island, and there's depictions of his life there. Sadly, now it's a very quiet, lots of ruins there, but it was once a thriving monastic community, and that was their home base, and they would go out from there to speak to people along the way in neighbouring areas. So St. Aidan, just a quick run through of St. Aidan. He was a monk again from Iona. He left the island in 635 and he just went to this area in Scotland to spread the Christian message. He was invited by King Oswald, who of course is also recognised as a saint. And you've heard of Saint Oswald. And he establishes the monastery there on the island of Lindisfarne or Holy Island. And it's really interesting. He used to walk around the countryside speaking to people. It was a very personal kind of preaching. It was not stand up in the crowds and preach to the masses. He found people one-on-one and spoke to them. He had this style of dealing with things. And he reposed in late August. Now, on the same day, St. Aidan was heading upwards to heaven. There was a young boy looking after sheep. And he saw this vision of this light going up to heaven. And that was St. Aidan's soul going up to heaven. And that young man was Cuthbert, the future St. Cuthbert. So you can see this chain from one saint to another. And there's an icon of St. Cuthbert. I'm not going to speak about him tonight, but he's another major saint if you want to read about St. Cuthbert. Any questions so far? I'm going to pause there. Like I said, tonight is a run through of 1,000 years. And I randomly picked saints. There's so many I did not pick. So I apologize if I missed a really important saint. But it's really just what I could grasp. There was too much to grasp tonight. Now we've got the Anglo-Saxon church and the monastic culture. So Pope Gregory the Great now sends St. Augustine of Canterbury to Canterbury. Where's Canterbury? Have we got on the map? I think it's more southwest, if I'm not wrong. So you've got St. Augustine is the first Archbishop of Canterbury, and his feast is on May 27. So these are some names just to register. Now we finally come to someone we just spoke about. So then you've got the medieval church, which covers the 9th to the 15th centuries. So you've got growth of monasteries, monastic centers, like Lindisfarne, Holy Island, there's Jarrow, and monasteries were also schools, and that's how royalty and others would go to the monasteries and get educated. So they were not only monasteries, but even during the occupation of Greece, how, monks often were the teachers of the people. So here we see the monasteries have an education role as well. Saint Bede, we spoke about before, he's also referred to Saint Bede the Venerable, lived from 672 onwards. So he's not a very holy man and a monk, but he was a historian, and we're very blessed to have his writings. And I started reading the book. It's actually not hard reading. Remember, this was written about 1300 years ago. It's actually amazing reading for something that's so old. We know the Great Schism happened in 1054 between the East and the West. So pretty much the saints before that time, are ones that we recognize. So let's talk a little bit about Saint Bede, and I'm going to read a little bits here and there because he is another amazing, his life was shocking in some ways. So, as I said, he was a church historian. He was probably born about 673 in Northumbria. Okay, so that northern region. And when he was 7, he was sent by Saint Benedict Biscop at the monastery of St. Peter and to be educated and raised. So here you have a young man being sent to a monastery to get his education. He later becomes a monk, a deacon, when he was 19 years old, and becomes a priest by the age of 30. He had great love for church services. He loved being part of the church and taking part in services. He believed that since the angels were present with the monks during the services, that he should also be there. So he had this great reverence. And we say that too, when in the liturgy, we shouldn't leave before the Ephon, because we have Christ and the angels all present in this liturgy. So that's why we're so careful in the liturgy. We don't talk to other people and things like that. It's a divine presence. It's the whole kingdom in front of us that we participate in. So, as I showed you, he's done these 2 books. Now, in 735, remember, he was a prolific writer. He wrote a lot of books. He was a great writer. In 735, he became unwell. And for 2 weeks before Pascha, he was weak and had trouble breathing. And he had little pain, but he remained cheerful and he kept teaching his students and what he had to do. He would often quote the words of St. Ambrose, "I have not lived in such a way that I am ashamed to live among you, and I do not fear to die, for God is gracious." And it's amazing how many people approach the end of their life without fear that they're going to go to God. In addition to giving daily lessons and chanting the Psalms, St. Bede was also working on an Anglo-Saxon translation of the Gospel of St. John and other works as well. And this is the interesting bit. He was dying, but he hadn't finished his works. After a sleepless night, St. Bede continued his dictation on Wednesday morning. At the 3rd hour, there was a procession with the relics of saints in the monastery, and the brethren went to attend the service, leaving a monk named Wilbert with Bede. The monk reminded him that there remained one more chapter to be written in his book, which he was dictating. So he would dictate, he would say it, and he would write down whatever he said. And he said, "It is no trouble. Take your pen and write quickly." At the 9th hour, Bede paused and told Wilbert that he had some items on his chest, some leftover things he wanted to give away, and it was just pepper, incense, and linen. He asked the monk to bring the priests of the monastery so that he could distribute these items to them. He gave whatever he had away, and we didn't have many possessions. When they arrived, he spoke to them in turn, requesting them to pray for him and to remember him in their services. Then he said, "The time of my departure is at hand, and my soul longs to see Christ my King in his beauty." That evening, Wilbert said to him, "Dear master, there is one sentence left unfinished." Bede said, "Very well, write it down." Then the young man said, "It is finished now." He finally finished the book. St. Bede replied, "You have spoken truly. It is well finished." Then he asked Wilbert to raise his head so that he could see the church where he used to pray. After chanting "Glory to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit" to its ending, St. Bede fell asleep in the Lord whom he had loved. What an amazing end to his life. Who's heard of St. Edith? St. Edith, the nun of Wilton Abbey, again commemorated this week. I only added her because she appeared on the list. When I got up in the morning, I look at the saints of the day. I'm like, oh, there's another English saint. And what inspires me is who can work out how old she was when her life ended. How old was she?
23.
23.
Quick math.
How many of us at 23 are in this state? I wasn't, definitely not, and I'm still not. She was of royal background. So she was pretty much a princess, and she would have been educated in the monasteries, and she fell in love with the church, and she decides to become a nun. She left behind her gowns and all her precious things. And she's raised at Wilton Abbey by her mother. She becomes a very holy lady, young lady. She was smart. She was very pious, but very charitable. She gave charity around to anyone. She's known for her wisdom, her asceticism, her fasting, and care for the poor and the sick. The things that we learn from her, and if you want to read her life, if you're, especially you young ladies, have a look at her life. She was the daughter of a king, so she had it all in life. She could have had a very easy life, have servants looking after her. She chose to become a servant. She gave up her riches and distributed whatever she had to the poor. She had nothing. She was like a pauper in her life, but she was happy. And she was even offered, when her brother died, to become the queen. And she turned it down. She was happy doing what she was doing. So, even after she passed away, miracles occurred at her shrine, at her grave. So she's a great inspiration for a young woman, her strength of character and the strength of her faith. And finally, we get to the Reformation, and we know that, King Henry VIII married so many times, and the church didn't allow him to remarry, so he decided to set up his own church. So that's how the Church of England was born. And I said before, pretty much before the schism, we recognize those saints. Then you've got Saint Oswin, a king. So we have another holy king. So, just because someone is rich or famous or, in authority doesn't mean, Christ says it's very hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, but it's not impossible. Anything is possible with God. So again, this is in Northumbria, another Northumbrian person. And even though he was the king, he was the monarch, people would have bowed to him, he had all the riches, he ruled gently, seeking peace and unity. He was actually betrayed and slain, so he was killed in 651, and his death is treated as a martyrdom. And there's Freedswyde of Oxford, another holy lady, Anglo-Saxon princess. So you have another royal who basically leaves her royal heritage behind and becomes an abbess, which is in charge of a monastery in Oxford, which is sort of southwest Britain. And her life is very interesting as well, because you can imagine a very pretty princess would have been sought after, and she was. But at a young age, she takes a vow to live as a nun, that she was not going to marry or anything like that. And she basically is pursued by Prince Algar, who wants her for his wife. And basically she flees. And I don't know what else happened, but that prince was struck with blindness. And what happens is she prays for him and his blindness is healed. So she does a miracle on him. So, another, again, miracles after her passing as well as during her life. So she's the patron saint of Oxford. So again, and she has 2 feasts in October 19 when she reposed, but also when her relics were translated in February. Now here's the other big patron saint of Ireland, Saint Bridget. Have you heard of Saint Bridget? The most popular woman saint of Ireland, and she's second patron saint after St. Patrick. So another one you can go and read about, but there was actually an icon of her in the archdiocese, which we photographed there. And finally, we come to the second millennium, and I'm not going to even cover a second 1,000 years in the little time I've got. But as in relation to our pilgrimage, we went to Essex Monastery, where, of course, Saint Sophrony the Athonite, or Saint Sophrony of Essex, set up the monastery, and his relics, his tomb is there. They're not allowed to remove the relics because it's the local law there that you cannot open up the tombs. So his full grave is there. And you'll have a chance. I think we spoke a bit about it last year, but there'll be some more information about that next month. So that's Saint Sophrony. We know which icon is he holding? His spiritual father.
St. Joseph, yes.
No, it's the one he made known to the world. He wrote his life story. He was canonized in the 1980s, shortly before Saint Sophrony passed. Saint Silouan the Athonite. So something very interesting from the monastery in Essex was Saint Sophrony used to sit in the back corner of the little chapel, and there's a little icon, probably the first icon of Saint Silouan on the wall there. And there's a piece of glass now at the bottom of the icon because he used to rest his head on his spiritual father on the icon during the services. So it's actually probably the first icon of Saint Silouan sitting at the monastery of Essex. A very beautiful place. So any comments before we finish off? Yeah, questions?
So no one sort of is kind of a shame in some respects regarding the Christian church in England and all that sort of stuff, that these saints aren't very well known in their culture, or at least it's not as accentuated, like it's not in common knowledge in the rest of the English-speaking world for these saints. So do they have a role within the Church of England? And
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's a shame a lot of us Orthodox don't know about these saints, because there are saints as well. And almost everyone I spoke about tonight is not Greek. Almost none of them are Greek. And Saint Sophrony was Russian. He was a Menathos, but he's Russian. Most of the others were not Greeks. Of course, there actually is a Greek who from the 7th century commemorated today from Archbishop of Canterbury, believe it or not. They're popping up all the time now that I'm looking. But yeah, the tragedy is we don't know about them, the Orthodox. So we have a lot to learn. But they do, especially Church of England, the Catholics do honor a lot of these saints as well, because we have a common heritage that burst 1,000 years. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. There's a whole new world out there. Saint John Maximovich spent a lot of time also trying to not promote, but make people aware of the Western saints in the Orthodox Church. So there are sites from the Russian Church where they've got lists of these saints. So there's a whole new world in the West we can discover from the first millennium. Yeah. Any other comments? So I've given you a few saints. You might have caught on to one that interested you. You can go away and read about them, and I'm going to finish with a few little points. What is it we can learn, apart from hearing about some saints, which is nice to have some stories and inspirations? But these are quotes from the Old and New Testament, and the theme is the same. And St. Peter quotes this old quote from Leviticus. I am the Lord your God. This is God speaking to his people. Consecrate yourselves, separate yourselves, be holy, and be holy, for I am holy. That's what God says. It's not me. That's God speaking to us. Be holy, for I am holy. This is what he wants from us. Not be good, not be a goody person. Be holy, for I am holy. This is what he wants from us. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm of the earth. Don't be tied down to the things of the earth. You're for up there. He's got expectations of us. Another quote, thus you are to be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy. Repetitive theme. And I've set you apart from the peoples to be mine. We belong to him. This is a personal relationship with God. He's talking to us, you're mine. I love you. I want you with me. And I'm offering you this. Not that we know how to be holy. Who does? But he gives it to us if we love him. Just comes from just loving him. Just loving him. That's all he asks. We're not asked to be perfect. It doesn't say be perfect. It doesn't say be sinless. Who is? None of us. But we have the source of holiness. It is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. This is what St. Peter quotes in the New Testament, but he's referring to the Old Testament quote. And again, St. Peter says, like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior. Okay, so this is a message for all of us. And it doesn't matter who we are, what we've done, no matter how sinful we may be, what race we come from. The message is the same for all the people. And I was going to say, from what you said there, In the UK, we met so many converts, and some parishes, like in Newcastle in the UK, 50% of the parish are converts. They're not Greeks, they're not Cypriots. We were told a nice little thing by the Archbishop there. He's got it saying the BBCs, the British-born Cypriots. But this is inspirational to see so many people who are Spanish, English, Anglo-English people, Negro people, Asians from Singapore. We were meeting these people all across the UK. In Essex, there was a Chinese lady from China who was taking part in the services. She was Orthodox. Her name was Evgenia. So it doesn't matter about your background. It's not about being Greek or Russian or Serbian or anything else. We're all God's children and all called to be holy and to be his children. And this is, I think, a message we can all, learn to love. And for me, I found it strange. I walked in church and saw a Chinese lady. That's strange. It shouldn't be strange. Or I saw, a Negro man walked in. I thought, is he visiting? I'm not used to that. He was doing his cross. He was taking part in communion. It was actually very beautiful. So I think it's a message that's universal. The church is for everyone. There's no privileged peoples. We have a lot of a blessed history in our Greek heritage, but we should be able to share our faith with everyone. And the best way to share our faith is not with what we say. It's with who we are. What we do and what we don't say is probably more important than what we say. We don't need to tell people we're Christian. So probably the worst thing we can do is say, I'm a Christian. We might have to say it. But show them we're a Christian. It's more important than saying it. And the last thing I want to read to highlight is there's so many saints out there. And if you see the icon at the front, we've got Saint Sophronic, if you want to come and venerate him later. But the icon of the saints of Great Britain. And there's so many, and we can't relate to all of them. But even if you relate to one or two saints, no matter who they are, study their life, pray to them, they will help you. And there are saints who said, like Saint Paisios and others, when you pray to a saint, they're right next to you, right there listening to you, ready to help you. They're always, as soon as you call on a saint with your heart, they're there for you. They're there to pray for you. And that's why we don't pray to the saints like they're gods. We pray for them as our brothers and sisters in heaven who are so close to God, they can pray for us. So if you have a saint, love the saints. And they're our closest friends to heaven. And when we have a trouble, we can pray to them with our own words, or we can read their Orthodoxy, their supplication service. And I'll finish with a little story. And I know it's probably not good to be personal, but it is a real story. One of my friends was once, he's a doctor now, but he had a lot of stress in his life. And I was trying to ring him to wish him all the best before his big exam in Melbourne. And he didn't pick up the phone. And I know he's a real stress case. So I thought, what can I do for him? What can't ring? He won't answer text. I said, I'm going to read the Orthodoxy of Ayupandelimona. Just read it. He was a doctor saying. And that night, when he came back, he said to me, I said to my wife, I can feel Greg's praying for me. And that's not me. That was the power of the saint. So the saints have a lot of power. We just have to trust them. And find a saint you can relate to. Have their icon in your room. When you say your prayers, you might say a prayer to you. Or learn their politikion. The hymn to your saint. Read it in Greek and English, whatever language you like, Chinese. It doesn't matter as long as you understand it. So when we finish with prayer tonight, we're going to read the hymns to 3 of the saints we spoke about tonight. And that you'll see from those hymns, they're actually prayers to them to pray for us. I think I've said enough. Do we have any other comments? Questions?
She dies, so
That's a good question. I was dreading somebody was going to ask me that. It crossed my mind tonight. I'd have to check her life. I don't want to lie to you. I think it was of illness, but I'd have to check. For someone to die so young in their 20s, in those times, it was probably an infection, unless it was a mishap the Vikings got you. But I think it was illness. And there are probably not many antibiotics and things. There weren't antibiotics and treatments in those days. So, fantastic. So, there's an icon of the British saints, the British Isles. You've got Ireland, and there's many, many more we probably don't know about. But I think we heard about enough tonight. Do you have to make any announcements? I mean, these are the 3 Apolitikia. We've got St. Columba, Saint Cuthbert and Saint Sophrony.
You can do the
We can do those for prayer. Do you want to do those?
prayer first, yeah.
Okay, so I want
By your God-inspired life, you embodied both the mission and the dispersion of the Church, most glorious Father Columba. Using your repentance and voluntary exile, Christ our God raised you up as a beacon of the true faith, an apostle to the heathen, and an indicator of the way of salvation. Wherefore, O Holy One, cease not to intercede for us, that our souls may be saved.
Having surpassed your brethren in prayers, fasting, and vigils, you were found worthy to entertain an angel in the form of a pilgrim, and having shone forth with humility as a bright lamp set on high, you received the gift of working wonders. And now as you dwell in the heavenly kingdom, our righteous Father Cuthbert, intercede with Christ our God that our souls may be saved.
As a queen bee, O Father, you gave birth to the rational bees gathered around you into the honeycomb of light. O Father and gatherer, gathered the money of incorruption and the pure beeswax fashioned by your God, exalting the isle of Britain, O venerable.
Amen. Evhon tumla yam paternemon Kyrie Sugestio Theos, eleison que sosumimas. Amen.